Okay, so good morning, everyone. This is the Entrepreneurship and Organizational Structure webinar. A couple of disclaimers before we start. Some of the slides I am recycling from some of my courses, about 40%. The other 60% were created specifically for this webinar. Uh, I'm trying to make it as practical as I could so that we can at least get some value out of today's session. And welcome to my home studio. I'm looking forward to sharing some information with you, and hopefully, we'll learn something in the process. A little bit about me. I've been with Ana Jimenez since I want to say 1996. No, 2006. So I've been with the faculty for a while. I've also taught at some other local universities here and online. I'm currently working as a senior learning development specialist. So I develop online courses and that kind of thing. Um, I also I am a member of uh, Puerto Rico Property Group Limited, which is an organization that purchases property for rental and manages them. I'm also an advisor. My son is a realtor and he has a professional association. And in the state of Florida, you can register a professional association as a corporation. He registered it as an S Corp. We'll talk about that later on. And I'm an advisor to that S Corporation. I also owned a company. I'm from Puerto Rico, and while I was living there, I owned the company S&P Computer Services. It started out automating small business accounting systems, and it quickly grew into installing and upgrading computer systems for small businesses. In Puerto Rico, it's very difficult to get the accountants to open the books to populate the accounting software. So I had to change with the demand. So I have a little background on today's subject. Um, Couple of business rules: keep your mics muted. Obviously, you all faculty, you know how it is with the students. Use that raised hand, and I'll call on you. If for some reason I miss you or anything, we can catch up at the end. Or you can post your question in the chat. I am monitoring the chat, and I'll ask at any time. Interrupt, it's okay. We're here to discuss and chat and share information, so I don't mind being interrupted to answer a question. So let's sit back, learn, and enjoy. So these are the topics I'm going to go over. Some of them are kind of short, maybe a couple of slides long, but I wanted to touch on most of these because I believe this is the essence of what most people are looking for when we're talking about entrepreneurship. And I added the last one on social media. That's a question that I get often, especially from the students, is how do I use social media and what is the best way to go about that? So I want to touch on that a little bit because I think it is a topic of interest for most people. So when we look, Zapier is a company that automates workflows for people or companies that use applications software. And they commissioned the Harris poll. And it's interesting the results because they found that 3 in 5 Americans, that's 61% of the population of the United States, have had an idea to start a business. And about 34% of those had more than one idea. But sadly, 92% of them don't follow through. So what we see a lot of people wanting to start a business, but they don't ever get to do that. During the recent epidemic, and that was kind of a unique thing. It had never happened before in the way that it happened. What we have found is that there was a lot of new business startups. Now, the press has been talking about the great resignation, but they haven't highlighted what happened to all those people that resigned their corporate jobs. Well, many of them, 4.3 million, in fact, started a new business and they decided to go on their own. So we see this big increase in new startups. So we talk about entrepreneurship and what is that? Well, there's different ways of defining entrepreneurship. The first way is the way the academics define it, and most of that is following the thought process of Professor Stevenson at Harvard Business School, where he defines it as the pursuit of opportunity beyond resources controlled. What does that mean? Well, it means that entrepreneurship is a process of looking for an opportunity to start a business regardless of what your resources are. When we look at a venture capitalist, they define it as the art or specialty of turning an idea into some kind of business. So, in essence, we can say that entrepreneurship is the process of designing, launching, and running a new business, or the capacity and willingness to develop, organize, and manage a business, along with all the things that come with it, particularly the risks that you have to take in order to make a profit. We can also use the term in a corporate setting, and we call that corporate entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. And this is the idea that a company can develop new products, new businesses, new services inside of an existing organization to increase or create new value and increase revenue. And when they do that, following the entrepreneurial thought and action. And what is that process? Well, it's pretty simple, really. In a simple form, it's coming up with an idea, evaluating and making sure that idea is in fact an opportunity, and we'll talk about the difference in a little bit. Develop a plan. We in academia like to tell our students, you need to develop a business plan. Well, in reality, most people don't develop a written business plan, but they have the plan in their minds. I will offer it's best to write it down so you have something to reference to identify if you're on track or not. Then you determine what are the resources that you need, you open the business, and you manage it. And that's essentially the process. Clearly, it's a simplified version of the entrepreneurial process, as we'll see later on. There are some details and things that we must do in order to get the business going. And what is the impact of all of this? Well, first, there's innovation. Uh, think about most companies in the United States are small businesses, and they have a huge impact on everything that we do and consume. Statistics show that small companies are much more productive than large companies, particularly as we see the number of patents that are being registered. Then we also have an impact on employment creation. Since small businesses are the majority in the United States, we see that they are also creating the greatest number of employment. And then we have impacts on society and the companies. For society, think about all the products and services that these small businesses are creating and offering that make our life easier, help improve our health, even entertain us in ways that we were never entertained before. Netflix, by the way, was a small business startup. And then you have the impact on larger companies. Many entrepreneurial people build their business around producing products that serve society and makes companies more efficient. We have seen a growth of small businesses whose sole purpose in life is to help large corporations be more efficient and effective at what they do. Take, for example, ADP. ADP was a small business startup. Ana Jimenez uses ADP for their payroll. And so what ADP is doing is making large corporations much more efficient and effective at managing payroll. And that's a really good example of the impact that small businesses have on large corporations. So what are the categories of all these startups? Notice I use the term categories, not types. We'll look at types in a minute. First of all, you have scalable businesses. A scalable startup is created with the idea that it's going to grow very rapidly, and we see that most often in the tech field. And it's a good option for a person that knows the market very well. They identified a huge growth potential. They're willing to get in there and change the status quo, and they want to be the leader. And so this type of business grows very, very fast. Then you have large companies. You can actually start a business as a large company, but more often than not, we see large companies starting new businesses. And they need to do that. Oftentimes, we call them spin-offs. They take a product or a service and spin it off into its own company. Uh, and what they're trying to do is to identify or reach new audiences, diversify their products or offerings, and keep the large corporation um, up to date with new and emerging changes in the market. And this is good for a person that already has a company and is successful. They're looking to diversify, they want to grow their business, and they need ways to compete with the changing market. Another category is the small business, and this is the one that we are most often identify with entrepreneurship is the small business. Uh, Here, they're set up to be in business forever or for as long as the owners are alive or willing to keep that business going. Uh, this is what we call the family operated, the business that started in somebody's garage. Uh, and this is good for the person that wants a small local business, wants to include the family in the business, wants to help the local community, and is looking for a business that is going to be sustainable, that they are going to be able to be in this business for a long time, and is not necessarily focused entirely on making money. They'd rather just stay busy and make a living out of it. Another category is social entrepreneurship. Now, these types of companies, uh, they're not designed to make money. They're really designed for some kind of positive social or environmental change. Uh, Take, for instance, going green. That's the big thing now is everybody wants to go green. So this is good for a person that feels that they can contribute to that positive social and environmental change. And they're not necessarily interested in the money. Although clearly, we cannot put that aside. People go into business expecting to make money. And the other category is the lifestyle. And this is where people have a hobby that they enjoy doing, they do it well, and they want to turn it into a business. Uh, this is the kind of people that like what they do. And you know the saying, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So the lifestyle startups are those kinds of people that have a hobby, like doing it, enjoy dealing with people, and make it a business. And then you have the viable, and this is an interesting category because the business is created with the intent to be sold. They are going to build a business expecting to be bought out. And we see this a lot in the tech industry as well. The people that start viable startups are not interested in keeping the business for a long time. Their interest is get it started, make it grow, and sell it. And then they move on to another enterprise. So, how do you start the business? I'll talk a little bit about the basic fundamentals of starting a business, and then we'll look how do we do that in the state of Florida. I think that will be of some interest. Clearly, you have to have an idea, and you have to validate that idea is a viable option. Then you have to find a business name. And there are some rules and regulations on naming a business, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. Then you have to register the business. And you register the business, that's usually free or very cheap. You could probably register the business for 50 bucks online even. You don't have to be present to do that. And then you develop a business plan. Of course, we recommend that you develop a written business plan. Uh, but if you don't have a written business plan, as long as you have a plan, that might suffice for starting your business. Then you have to understand all the finances. So you need to be savvy on financial management. And we'll talk some more on that too. And then you need to develop your product or service. And here's where I think a lot of new entrepreneurs fall a little bit short. Uh, it's not just an idea, and it's not just taking advantage of an opportunity. You have to be able to develop your product or service and understand the details of what that means. And to give you an example, this is an interview they held of Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. Listen to how detailed he knows his product and service. Let's see.
Hi there, who are you?
I'm Jeff Bezos.
And what is your claim to fame?
I'm the founder of Amazon.com.
Where did you get an idea for Amazon.com?
Well, 3 years ago, I was in New York City working for a quantitative hedge fund when I came across the startling statistic that web usage was growing at 2,300% a year. So I decided I would try and find a business plan that made sense in the context of that growth. And I picked books as the first best product to sell online, which are making a list of like 20 different products that you might be able to sell. And books were great as the first best because books are incredibly unusual in one respect, and that is that there are more items in the book category than there are items in any other category by far. Music is number 2. There are about 200,000 active music CDs at any given time. But in the book space, there are more than 3 million different books worldwide active and in print at any given time across all languages. More than 1.5 million in English alone. So when you have that many items, you can literally build a store online that couldn't exist any other way. And that's important right now because the web is still an infant technology. Basically right now, if you can do things using a more traditional method, you probably should do them using the more traditional method.
What kind of inventory do you keep?
We inventory the best-selling books. At any given time, we're inventorying in our own warehouse only a couple of thousand titles. And then we do almost in-time inventory for another 400,000 titles or so. We get those from a network of we order electronically from a network of wholesalers and distributors. We order those today. They're on our loading dock the next morning. Then for another 1.1 million titles, we get those directly from 20,000 different publishers, and those can take a couple of weeks to get. And then there are 1 million out-of-print books in our catalog. We have a catalog of 2.5 million books altogether. Those million out-of-print books, some of them we can get and some of them we can't, but we find them if we can, and then we ship them to our customers. We do a kind of a search on those.
What's almost-in-time inventory?
Almost-in-time inventory is the phrase we use to describe a whole selection of books that we offer. It's basically the things that are, below the 2,000th best-selling book up to the 400,000th best-selling book. Those are titles that we can get from a network of more than a dozen different wholesalers. So if a customer orders a book from us today, we order that book from our wholesalers today, and that book shows up on our loading dock the next morning. And then we can ship it to the customer.
They say one of the toughest things to do on the internet is to capture mind share. What was your secret? How did you do that?
Yeah, even more generally, I agree with you that capturing mind share on the internet is extremely difficult. Even more generally, it's the late 20th century, not just the internet. Capturing attention. Attention is the scarce commodity of the late 20th century. And one of the ways that you can do that, and it's the way that we did it, was by doing something new and innovative for the first time that actually has real value for the customer. That's a hard thing to do, but if you do that, then newspapers will write about you, what you're doing. Customers will tell other customers, and you'll get a huge word of mouth fan out. And that can really drive and accelerate businesses. And that's what happened with us. In the first year of opening Amazon.com to the public, we didn't do any paid advertising. And all of our growth was fueled by word of mouth and media exposure.
I saw little ads at the bottom of the column of the New York Times.
That was our very first advertising. We don't do that anymore, but at the very beginning, we did little tiny ads at the bottom of the front page of the New York Times.
I thought that was very clever. It's sort of using a URL as a macro, because I read
that it expands.
We're a bookstore, click here.
Right. That's a great way to think of it.
And it worked very well, apparently.
I don't know, the problem with that kind of advertising is it's extremely difficult to track.
Put a different URL for every...
That's the problem, is that you want people to start to learn your URL, so you don't want to actually use a different one. And it's very easy. One of the great things about online ads, we do advertising today in maybe 40 different, on different websites. We do banner ads. And that advertising is very easy to track in terms of knowing how effective it is. So we know for each piece of creative in each venue, not only how many click-throughs we get, but how many sell-throughs we get, how many dollars of revenue it generates per ad dollar spent on that creative in that venue. And that is a sort of a marketer's nirvana in a certain sense.
Well, it's an exciting place to be on the web right now.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, it's just incredible. What's really incredible about this is that this is day one. This is the very beginning. This is the Kitty Hawk stage of electronic commerce. We're moving forward in so many different areas, and lots of different companies are as well. And the late 20th century is just a great time to be alive. We're going to find out that, I think a millennia from now, people are going to look back and say, wow, the late 20th century was really a great time to be alive on this planet.
So notice that was in 1997, and I believe a lot of what he said there still applies today. I think we're having the same issues. Attention is a scarce commodity. So you need to know in detail. You saw how he was able to describe in detail what his process was, what got shipped immediately from his warehouse, what inventory he maintained, what got shipped, and what he called the fast turnaround: order it, get it the next day, ship it to the customer the next day, and then what took longer to process. So developing your product or service is critical to any startup. Then you need to pick a business structure, and we'll talk about the different structures here in a little bit. There's a lot of tax implications and risk involved with the different types of structures. Once you have selected a structure, then you have to do your research for any licensing or regulations that apply to the particular industry that you are opening your business in. Then you select the tools that you're going to use and the processes that you're going to follow to run that business, and find the location where you're going to do your business. And that could be a commercial site or home-based, whatever. Once you do that, you plan your workload, you establish who's going to be working on the team, and you frankly open your business and go to work. I will offer that in today's environment, you really also need to consider seriously establishing a viable presence on the internet. I think that is a critical component of starting a new business in today's day and age. So who's doing this? We call them entrepreneurs. And who are they? Well, it's anybody who's willing to take the risk to start their own business based on an idea or a product or service that they are going to provide, while assuming all the risk involved in that venture and reaping most of the rewards of that business. In Spanish, we call them emprendedores o empresarios. and it could be anybody. Why do they do it? These are the three most common reasons why people cite as starting their own business. They want to be their own boss, they want to chase their own ideas, do their own thing, or they're looking to make a lot of money. Uh, there is some fallacy involved in the reasons why people cite why they want to open their own business, because the idea of being your own boss, I think it's a little confusing. Sure, you will have the freedom to execute as you wish, but your customers then become your new boss. So you're kind of always working for somebody. So what are the types of businesses? And here's the interesting concept of what's happening in the United States today. First, we have women-owned businesses, and that is growing quickly. If you look at the American Express Open study that they conducted, there were 11.6 million women-owned businesses in the United States, and they're generating more than 1.7 trillion in annual sales. Huge, huge. The majority of them are concentrated in the retail and service sector, and that's probably a result of our culture. We also see that women-owned businesses tend to be smaller than men-owned businesses, and that could be for a number of reasons. Maybe their age, maybe the age of the business, maybe the industry that they're in, maybe women are finding more obstacles than men. But for whatever the reasons, we do see that women-owned businesses tend to be smaller than men. Then we have minority-owned businesses. And this is an interesting thing because this country is made up of people from all walks of life. And when you look at how many are there, there's over 4 million minority-owned businesses. And we see a lot of supporting organizations for both women-owned and minority-owned businesses. And I list a few here, the Latino Business Association, the Black Business Association, there's an Asian Business Association, the Small Business Administration helps them all. So there's a lot of organizations that can help specific groups of our demographics. Now, the term minority business is commonly used, but I think now we're starting to distinguish a little bit within those minorities. And some researchers believe that we should make that distinction and separate ethnic entrepreneurs, immigrant entrepreneurs, and the rest of the minority entrepreneurs. And what's that difference? Well, they don't necessarily face the same issues when they start a business. We see immigrants are the ones that just recently arrived, and they're doing this as a means of survival. They need to get a job. If we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, they need to ensure that they're making a living and they're providing for their families. So they're doing this out of survival. Then you have ethnic entrepreneurs who are creating this business to serve people of the same ethnic background. And we see this often in places like Chinatown in the big cities. You see almost all big cities have a Chinatown, and all small businesses are serving that ethnic community. And we need to separate them because not all ethnic entrepreneurs are recent immigrants, and the issues they face tend to be different. So that they're looking at clarifying a little bit and being able to help in different ways the different categories, if you will, of minority-owned businesses. Then you have home businesses. Again, this is another common type of business that we associate with entrepreneurship. These are what we normally call cottage industries. There are studies that indicate that at least 50% of new businesses are home-based businesses. and they're generating a huge amount of revenue, 300 billion in 2019. And the reason for this is probably we have better tools at our disposal. Now most people have internet in their house. They're able to do business using the internet. We see, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people did not want to get involved by being around a lot of people, so they decided to start their own business. The economy plays a huge role. A lot of companies resize or downsize, and people are left wanting to do something. And so we see a lot of home-based businesses growing. And frankly, years ago, it wasn't looked at very positively. And now we're starting to see that people can be as productive or more productive in a home-based business than they were when they were working in corporate America. Now, there's a lot of advantages, clearly. You don't have to commute, your wardrobe costs go down, you're comfortable in your environment, you have flexible hours, you can do whatever, whenever. But there are some big significant disadvantages to home-based business. And I highlight a few of them here. The loss of structure. You really have to be self-motivated to be successful at a home-based business. You have to consider that you are going to be away from people, so you're going to be somewhat isolated. Sometimes you're so enthusiastic about the business that you spend a lot of time while at home working on the business, and you separate yourself from family events and sharing with friends. Uh, Plus, you have interruptions from the family. I've been working from home for the last 3 years, and at the beginning, that was a problem for me. I would be working on something fully concentrated, working on a project or a task, and a family member would interrupt me to ask a question or something that's completely unrelated to what I was doing, and that's an interruption. It kind of breaks your thought cycle, so that could be significant when you're starting a home business. And then you have potential legal issues. And let's talk about some of those legal issues. Uh, Zoning laws. Uh, every state has zoning laws, every city, every county has zoning laws. Uh, some of them prohibit home-based businesses from happening in the house. Uh, some cities require you to fill out specific forms in order to start your home-based business. And then you look at how are we being zoned. Most zones are residential, commercial, industrial, or agricultural. And home-based businesses are permitted in all but residential. Residential is a unique category, and you have to look at what, in fact, is allowed where you live. Uh, and if you live in a condominium, or you live in a townhouse or an apartment or subdivision, like where you have homeowners association, you have to look at those bylaws and see if a home business is permitted. In some cases, it's not, and you have to find another place to do your business. It's important to make sure that you are legally embarking on a home-based business. And then you have to consider utilities and insurance. Depending on the type of business, you also have to look at inventory. If you are going to maintain inventory because you're selling a product, where would you maintain that inventory? Is it going to be in your garage, in a spare bedroom? Do you have the facilities to do that? Will the homeowners association allow trucks to be coming in and out of your home because you're shipping products, or will you be required to take them to the post office yourself? A lot of things to consider. Then electricity, utilities, water. You may not have the means to do that, and you need to consider that. And then insurance. Most companies need to be insured, and clearly most homeowner insurance do not cover business activities. So you might have to get a separate insurance policy for that. And then taxes. You know, we heard a while back, Al Gore said that he invented the internet, and that was kind of a misconception of what he actually did. Because what he actually did was he pushed forward the Taxpayer Relief Act. And what that did, it brought changes to most home based businesses in that before that, you couldn't take a tax deduction for your home business. You had to spend all your time working at home in order to get any tax benefit. If you were out dealing with customers, you could not deduct the time you were out dealing with customers. And the Taxpayer Relief Act now provides for you can have a business, a home-based business, and you can go out and service your customers. But as long as you do all your administrative functions of that business in your house, you can apply for the tax benefit. And I think that's really critical because a lot of small businesses, take for example, uh, people that have landscaping businesses or uh, um, uh, killing of bugs. What do they call that? I'm lost for words here. Um, anyway, where they fumigate for bugs and stuff. They actually go out and service the customer. They go to the customer's house. So prior to this Taxpayer Relief Act, they were not able to take a deduction, and now they can, if as long as the administrative functions of that business is done at the house.
Excuse me, Professor. Pest
Yes,
control is the word that you're looking.
pest control. Yes, thank you. Yeah, well, that's a really good example of how this Tax Relief Act has benefited companies like that. Uh, and when you look at pest control, for example, where do you store the chemicals? They have to be stored somewhere. So prior to the Tax Relief Act, a lot of these businesses stored their chemicals. They rented one of those storage spaces and they used that to store all their chemicals, provided that they had insurance. A lot of those things are flammable, so you have to be careful. But the good thing is that the Taxpayer Relief Act now allows home-based businesses to take the deduction with the caveat that most of your administrative functions need to be done at home. Oh, I get, yeah, some examples right there. Lawn care, pest control, air conditioning and heating repairs. Yep, this is all what I just said. All right. The other type is family businesses, and this is very specific defined. The Small Business Administration defines it as a company whose majority of ownership of control lies within a family with two or more family members directly involved in the business. However, the Massachusetts Life Insurance Company is a little bit more flexible in that, in addition to having family members actively participating in the business, they have to have the intent to pass the ownership of that business to a close relative. Doesn't mean that it's going to occur, but they have to have the intent. And how do you show intent in this case? It's simply part of your business plan. If you are actually include in your operating procedures that the intent is to give the business to a relative, then you meet this requirement. And the other thing that the Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company says, that if you self-describe yourself as a family business, it's good enough for them. And there are advantages, of course, of starting a family business. You have people that you can trust, they're family members, obviously. Uh, People view that as something positive. You have the opportunity to include them long term. Uh, we need to be careful because one of the main disadvantages is that family issues often spill over to the business and vice versa. Then you have entrepreneurial couples. These are still family businesses, and it is growing segment of the family business environment where both spouses decide to open a business together. Uh, Tricky, yes, maybe. It makes it easy. One of the big advantages, people can take turns between them, makes themselves responsible for certain parts of the business. There's a lot of trust there. Uh, the disadvantage, of course, is you're spending a lot of time with your spouse now. Uh, we call that too much togetherness. And then oftentimes, most of the conversations at the home involve the business. So relationships suffer often because of that. And then what happens if there's a divorce? One of the partners is going to lose a business, or both in some cases. So it's critical that both parties have the same vision for the business. Um, it's best to clearly outline who's responsible for what in writing for the businesses. Uh, if divorce occurs, if you are in a community property state, things get split 50-50. If you are in a equitable distribution state like Florida, then everything starts at 50%, but then they apply a slew of guidelines and they make an attempt to make the distribution somewhat equitable. And Florida is one of those equitable distribution states. So you might find that it's not going to happen 50-50. One of the spouses is going to get more of that business than the other, generally. Oops. So if the business is dissolved because of divorce or they're breaking up, the partner that stays with the business may have to pay out the spouse so they can move on. Oftentimes that payment has to be in cash. The court is going to force payment of it. And if you don't have the money, then in that case, you might have to sell the business to get the money to pay them. And you'll have to start all over again. So you really need to determine which of the two spouses is going to stay with the business and which one is not is the one that's going to go and work out how that's going to be played out. So if the business existed before marriage, it's best to have a prenuptial agreement that addresses how the business will be dealt with in the case of a divorce. If the business is started after the marriage, then they suggest that a postnuptial agreement be established that identifies how the business will be handled if divorce occurs. In some cases, we see that divorced couples continue the business and continue working together. And the breaking of the relationship does not have a significant impact on the business. And that's okay too. But it should be clear and it should be in writing. And then the children. Oftentimes, a lot of business owners like to bring their children into the business. In that case, you really should have a plan on how that business is going to move to them over time. We call that a succession plan. And that should be in writing and very clear. And there are basically two strategies for that. One is low entry, where they come in, you bring the children in, and you have them as entry-level employees. And you tend to put them in different functions throughout the business. And the idea is that they learn the business before they move up into a managerial role. The other one is delayed entry, and this is where they recommend that children go out and do their own thing first, and then you bring them into a manager position after they have some work experience. There's no right or wrong here. It's usually good or better depending on the situation of the family and the age of the children. Some people recommend don't bring the kids in. I don't know. Like I said, that's something that should be looked at individually by family. But what we do know is that you need to pay them a fair market salary. They should be paid the same as a regular any other employee of the business. If you decide to give a family member a bonus because they've been doing well, it should be separate from their regular pay. It should have nothing to do with their normal operations. Um, you should also have, as part of your plan of succession, the idea of selling to a third party or selling to the employees of the company if you grow enough to have employees, so that it's clear in writing what that succession plan is. And you can't assume that you're going to give it to your kids. And the reason for that is a number of reasons. But basically, there's a lot of sibling rivalry. Some siblings feel that they know more about the business than the other, and then they start having problems. And in that case, maybe it's better to sell to a third party or sell it to the employees and let them take it from there. When we look at statistically, about 1/3 of businesses are successfully transferred to the next generation, and only 10 to 20% go beyond that, and even less for long-term generational succession. Um, and you see here why that normally occurs. Some of the kids just don't want to be in the family business. We see a lot of movies about that, where the kids just don't want, they want to do their own thing. They don't want to be part of the business. And of course, the rivalry between the kids. Then we have Then we have elderly owned businesses. And this is a growing population of entrepreneurs. Um, there's a lot of people that want to make it to full retirement age. And for most of us, full retirement age is no longer 65. It's usually 66 or 67 to get full Social Security. Um, and clearly, if you make it to 70, 70 is where you max your Social Security benefits. So a lot of people are trying to get to that age before they apply for Social Security. Clearly, the longer you wait, the more Social Security you will get. Uh, right now, the average 66-year-old will probably get about $3,000 a month in Social Security. If you wait till 70, you get almost 5,000. So the difference can be significant in our golden years. But we see that people 55 and over are about 21% of the population, and they own about 60% of small businesses. That's pretty significant. Uh, and we see that, especially now after COVID, there's a lot of people that don't want to go back to work, and they're opting to open their own business. And these are elderly. These are people that have experience, they're mature, they life expectancy is growing. Most of us, when we were born, our life expectancy was probably 60, 65, and now we're probably looking at 75 or 85 before we pass. And interestingly, if we look at the Social Security estimates, for example, I was born in 1957. My life expectancy when I was born was 66, and the Social Security Administration is saying now 84. So I have a long time before I pass to make money and live happily thereafter. So we can draw on our new extended health and stamina and our experience and our knowledge, and we can continue to work and be a successful business person. Then you have the young folks, the millennials. And when we canvass the millennials, there is a huge desire to open a business, to be their own business people. But very few do. Very few actually do. One of the things that we learned over the last few years is that people don't have to be in the office to be productive. So a lot of millennials are opting to work with companies that allow them the flexibility to work from anywhere. And so even though they want to be entrepreneurs and they want to open their own business, they are tending to work with companies that gives them the flexibility that they're actually looking for. We see that most colleges now offer courses on entrepreneurship. Uh, I can't think of any that don't. Most do. And then there's a lot of resources. You go to the Small Business Administration, you go to any of the social organizations that help people start businesses. So even if they're out of college, it's easy to get help to start a business. Who are they? Well, here's a little example of where the millennials falls. Now, these charts differ by who creates them, I guess. But generally, the millennials are those born between 81 and 85. What's going to happen with Generation Z and Generation Alpha? I don't know. Their attitudes might be different towards small businesses and entrepreneurship. Any questions so far? Okay. So let's look at some common myths and kind of dispel those so we're clear on what is and what is not. Myth number one, entrepreneurs are born, they're not made. That's a lie. It's false. I think that a lot of us believe that people are predisposed to be entrepreneurs. Not true. Anybody can do it. Sure, not everybody wants to do it, but if you have a desire, you have the potential. It all depends on your environment, your life experiences, and your personal choices. So entrepreneurs are not born, they are actually choose to be entrepreneurs.
Professor, sorry.
Yes, yes.
There is what we consider the influencers, that type of join people that are in the computer all the time and make a lot of money with that. That is a type of what type of business is that? It's considered an emprendedores also.
It is a type of business, although it's not generally a registered business. So what they are doing is they are working for somebody that is paying them for promoting their products. And that's changing too. We saw the influencer concept grow very rapidly 5-7 years ago, and it's growing to a point now where it's much more difficult now to become an influencer and make good money out of it. A lot of companies are now being very selective on who they choose to allow them to display their products. And I think that's the result of so many influencers that got caught lying on their photographs. You know, they took pictures of themselves supposedly on a trip in Fiji, and it turns out that they were in their backyard with a fake beach or something. So that's changing. And generally, they're not registered as a small business. They are simply freelancing and getting paid by companies for marketing a product or products, because it could be plural.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Where am I? So we cannot, and I don't think it's fair to say that all entrepreneurs share the same traits, and if you have these traits, you can be successful too. I don't think that's a fair assumption, but we can say, and we can identify what are the characteristics of an entrepreneur that are common, and these are most of them. You may not be born with them, but you surely can develop them. Take creativity, for example. Most of us feel, oh, I'm not creative at all. But when you really sit down and start thinking about what you can create, you can be very creative. You know, in class, I use an example of a paperclip. I present a picture of a paperclip and I ask the class to write down as many uses as they can think of for that paperclip. And I've had students come up with over 200 ideas of how to use a paperclip. So are they more creative than people that only identified 10? I don't think so. I think they just gave it more thought. So the idea that you have to be creative to be an entrepreneur, nah, not really, because we all have the capability to have these traits. And if we don't have them, we can develop them. But these are traits that are common to entrepreneurs. And the benefit of knowing these is that we can at least see, what do I need to do as an entrepreneur to grow my business? Where am I? What are my strengths and weaknesses? And if one of the weaknesses lies within one of these traits, well, I had just identified something that I need to put a little bit more effort into working and improving. Does that make sense? I hope. Myth number 2, entrepreneurs are gamblers. Yeah, well, I think that comes from the idea that they like to take risks. And sure, it is risky to open a business. And what is the risk? The risk is that you lose everything, that you lose all the money you invested, and all the time that you invested, and all the effort that you invested in getting this business going. That's risky. So the idea that entrepreneurs are gamblers comes from that risk. Most entrepreneurs don't like a lot of structure, so they'd rather do things freely, and maybe that's why people think that they're gamblers, but the reality is they're not. Most of them just have a strong need to achieve, and they set some challenging goals for themselves, and the behavior or the things they do are often equated with risk taking, but they are not gamblers. Myth number 3, entrepreneurs are primarily motivated by money. For a long time, I thought this was true. And the more I look at it, I mean, clearly it would be a disservice to entrepreneurs to say that the only reason they do it is for the money. In fact, we would say that if the reason you're doing it is just for the money, you are likely not to be successful. The money comes second. And we see a lot of entrepreneurs, when they talk about their business, how excited they get about what they are doing. And they very rarely talk about how much they're making. Most of them don't seek that financial reward. They know it's going to come regardless. Myth number 4, entrepreneurs must be young and energetic. That's another fallacy. It doesn't matter what age you are. I mean, if you're a legal age to work, you are a legal age to be an entrepreneur. And frankly, some elderly owned businesses are much more successful because of the maturity, the reputation, the experience, and the knowledge of somebody that's mature and older. So it is not true that entrepreneurs have to be young and energetic. Myth number 5 is that they love to be the center of attention. Yeah, we see some. We know Jeff Bezos of Amazon. We know Steve Jobs of Apple. There's a few that we know of, but there's a lot more that we don't know of that do not seek the spotlight. So I don't think this is true at all that entrepreneurs love to be the center of attention. What do you think? Just a rhetorical question. So let's go into the forms of ownership. I think this is the most interesting part of this webinar. There are different forms of ownership, and this is what we call structure, organizational structure. They are managed mostly at the state level. The federal law, it limits the number of different types of ownership, but these are the most common. Sole proprietor partnerships, then you have limited liability companies or LLCs, then you have the different categories of corporations, and then the nonprofits. Let's look at them individually. What's important here is to select the right ownership for your situation. And you need to consider a lot of these things: taxes, liability, your capital requirements, how much control you want to have of your business, what is your managerial ability to run that business, what are the goals of the company, what succession plans you may have, and how much does it cost to get started. Um, it's gonna influence everything you do with the business. And so we look at the first one. Uh, well, well, before we do that, let's highlight that there is no best. It's what is good for you in your case at the time that you are starting. Now, my students often ask me, which is the best way to start? And I thought about that question a long time, and after years of experience, I've come to realize that if all you're going to do is open a small business in your local neighborhood to get started, well, maybe a sole proprietorship is appropriate. But if you want to protect your personal assets, your money, your property, maybe an LLC is a better way to start. But it's not a way to, it's not, you shouldn't stay there forever. You should eventually find your way into becoming a corporation. And I'll talk more about that when in later on today. So it's important that you understand and know the different types of ownerships so that you can make the right choice. When we look at what's happening in the United States, we see that the percentage of ownership by type, that sole proprietorships is the largest by far. I mean, 72% of businesses are sole proprietorships. Um, but when we look at percent of sales, we see that corporations are making the most sales. Now, if you add up C Corp and S Corp, we'll talk about those, the differences in a minute. Uh, that's the majority of them. You know, we're talking about 82% of businesses in the United States by percent of sales are corporations. So it kind of makes you think, well, shouldn't I be a corporation as well? Well, maybe so. Something to think about. When you look at net income, again, corporations are gaining the greatest net income. So, something to think about. So, the first one is sole proprietorship. This is the simplest one, it's the easiest to create. It's probably the least costly to create. Generally, all sales profits go to the owner of the business. You have total control. You're a sole proprietor. You own the business. You are the business. If you decide to quit, there is no more business. So that is a big advantage. There are very little legal restrictions on being a sole proprietor. And it's really easy to close it. You just say, I'm not doing it anymore. And it's done. There are some disadvantages, and they can be significant. One of them is unlimited personal liability. So if you are serving customers and a customer has a bad experience and sues the company, they are suing you because you are the company. And that's a huge liability. Anything that the company owes, you owe, because the finances of the company are your finances. And then you're limited by your skills and your capabilities. Sometimes, as they say, it's lonely at the top. You are at the top. It is your business. And then you have limited access to capital. Being able to get money to start and run your business is a bit more difficult when you're a sole proprietor. Um, Banks and investors are very leery of loaning money to a sole proprietor unless they have a really good track record of success. The next type is partnerships. This is where you have two or more people starting the business. It's not required, but you should have a partnership agreement. And the partnership agreement states in writing everything about that business and how that partnership is going to operate, including each partner's interest in the business. When you don't have a partnership agreement, the Revised Uniform Partnership Act of 1997 takes precedence and is actually applied to a partnership that does not have a written agreement. Now, this applies in Florida, so if you're starting a new business in Florida, this applies if you don't have a written partnership agreement. And the key elements of this are those listed here. It says who owns it, how the profits and losses are going to be shared within the partners, who is going to be operating, controlling, managing, who's not, or how that's going to occur. And it actually sets the obligations of who of the partners is going to, or how business losses, working without a salary, how disagreements get settled, who pays for the bills, et cetera, et cetera. It's all, the act will apply if you don't have a written agreement. So it's always best to have a written agreement. And they're not difficult to develop. In fact, the state of Florida has templates that you can use to create this partnership agreement. It's important that you have one. There are advantages to it, and here's some of the advantages. Clearly, two heads are better than one, as they say. It's easy to establish. You complement each other. You can divide the profits however you want, 60-40, 50-50, 70-30, doesn't matter. You probably have access to more capital because now you have two people investing in this business, so you probably have more access to money. You can also attract limited partners, and we'll talk about limited partners in a second. There's not a lot of regulations, a little bit more than the sole proprietorship, but not so much. And there's a lot of flexibility. There are two types of partners, and these are the two types, general and limited. The general partners are the ones that are actually taking an active role in running the business. They have unlimited liability. So everything that happens in the business kind of rolls through to their personal because they are unlimited, they are general partners and they have unlimited liability. And in the state of Florida, every partnership has to have at least one general partner. So you may have multiple partners, but at least one of them has to be a general. Then you have the limited partners that do not participate in the day operation or management of the company. They also have limited liabilities based on their contribution to the business. And of those, there are two types. The silent ones that are generally not part of managing the business, but they are knowing who they are. And then you have dormant who don't operate in the business and are not known to be associated with the business. And these people might be simple folks that provide advice, or maybe a partner that provides funding or facilitates financing or processing, something that, and they don't want to be associated, their name with the business. You can have a combination of them. There are some disadvantages, of course. The unlimited liability of one partner is a huge potential issue. In the state of Florida, if one of the partners decides to leave, it actually dissolves the partnership unless it's specifically written in the partnership agreement how that will be handled if a partner leaves. So if you don't have a partnership agreement and one of the partners decides to leave, the partnership gets dissolved. And then you have the potential for personality conflicts and authority conflicts and decision-making conflicts that can happen. and then of course all the partners are bound by the law of agency, which is the guidelines or the rules that the state imposes on partnerships. You can also have a limited liability partnership, and that's kind of unique. It's kind of a subset of a partnership uh, where all the partners are limited partners. There aren't that many of them. They're usually restricted to certain categories like professional attorneys and physicians and dentists and accountants who are working with another person. They open a business and they're very limited in what they do. In that case, it can be a limited liability partnership. And there's some special regulations on how you apply for that within the state. And again, being a partnership, it's like the sole proprietor. There is no separation between the business and the individual. It's all the same. So all the income is passed through to the limited partners, and they pay taxes on that income. And as you know, the IRS taxes worldwide income on individuals. So any money that you get from anywhere is taxable income. And so in this case, on a limited liability partnership, all that income that the business generates passes to its limited partners and is part of that worldwide income. The next category is limited liability company, LLCs. These are pretty common. We see them a lot. What this does, it allows you to take the advantage of the sole proprietorship and partnership structure and some of the benefits of being a corporation, in that it separates you from your company. The company becomes an entity on its own. It pays its own taxes. It has its own, it does its own thing. So if you have an issue with a customer and the customer sues the company, they are suing the company and not you. So by doing a limited liability company, you are protecting your personal assets. Now, unlike a corporation and like a sole proprietorship or a partnership, all the profits and losses get passed to the individual and they're dealt with at the individual basis. Now, as an LLC or a partnership or a sole proprietor, you have to pay self-employed taxes, which is about 5.5%. And those taxes go towards Medicare, Social Security. There's no way out of that. So sole proprietorships, partnerships, and limited liability companies or corporations all pay self-employment tax, in addition to their regular taxing of their wages as an individual. It's stated that it's a good choice for medium or high-risk businesses. I will offer that it's probably good for anybody that wants to protect their personal assets and keep them separate from their business. So take, for example, a lot of new entrepreneurs use equity on their homes to start the business. Well, you want to protect that. If you get sued, you might lose your home. So by starting out as a limited liability company instead of a sole proprietorship, you are separating that. And if they sue the company, they sue the company. The company has to go bankrupt and close. That's a whole different story, but you won't lose your home. So it's advantageous to consider a limited liability company. In fact, I often recommend that new entrepreneurs who have been in business for a while, that started out as a sole proprietorship, that they switch to a limited liability company as soon as possible. This helps them protect against all those liabilities. Now, in some states, limited liability companies have a specific time of existence. If a member of the LLC leaves, that dissolves the LLC. Unless, again, it's written in the operating agreement. There are two documents that an LLC has to file, and it's the same for any corporation, and it is the Articles of Organization, that says everything about the company, the name, the address, how it's going to be managed, how long it's going to last, etc. And then you have an operating agreement that actually outlines the way it's going to conduct its business. And again, the state of Florida provides templates that you can use to create these. This is it's pretty easy. Now, there's a fee for submitting the articles of organization. I think in the state of Florida, it's $125. But if you have all that in writing and you submit the proper documents, you can register as a limited liability company and protect your personal assets while still enjoying the benefits of the pass-through income and not pay double taxation, as we'll see when we look at corporations. Corporations, we're all familiar with this. This is a company is an entity. It's the way the Supreme Court defined it is an artificial being, invisible, intangible, and existing only in contemplation of the law. And so it's completely and entirely separate from its owners. So you're not liable for anything the company does. And there are a couple of types, publicly held or closely held. We'll look at those in a minute. Publicly held means that they are participating in the stock exchange where they sell shares of ownership, and there can be different kinds of shares. And then a closely held is where it's just a small group of people that are managing that corporation. And you want to avoid legal issues by identifying as a corporation. You have to use Inc. or corporation in your business name. You have to file all the reports and pay all your fees in a timely manner. I believe that the corporation tax period is March 15th and not April 15th. You have to have a board of directors. So you have to have annual meetings and elect the officers and the directors that are going to participate in that board. You have to keep minutes of all the meetings, regardless if they're formal or informal. And you have to make sure that all the decisions that are made by the company or by the corporation are made by the board. So as an owner, you may be a member of the board, and the board is the one that issues the decisions, not you, because the corporation is its own entity. The most common, is, of course, is the C Corp. We're familiar with those. They pay their own taxes. So in essence, there's a double taxation here because any revenue that the corporation gains, they pay tax on, and any money that is paid to its owners, the owners have to pay tax on that. So that's why the term double taxation comes out. And that's a big disadvantage of starting a business as a corporation. A lot of advantages, a lot of disadvantages. You see them here. I will offer that if your business is such that it grows to the extent that it should be a corporation, corporations can attract investors easier. They can be in business forever. I mean, we see some corporations have been in business for hundreds of years. I mean, you see AT&T, for example. How long have they been in business? There are some disadvantages. Of course, the double taxation is huge. It's more costly to start a corporation. There's also somewhat of a loss of control, if you will. The owners that start the corporation don't make all the decisions by themselves. They have to go to the board for that, and the board is the one that makes them. So you're going to have inputs from other people in the decision-making process. A lot of people don't like that. You do have a ton of legal requirements and a lot of red tape that you have to work through. And eventually, you can even be ousted. We saw recently, I think it was the it was either Twitter or Men's Warehouse, I think, they outed, the board decided to get rid of the owner. And the owner ended up without a job, or without his business that he started. The next type is S corporations, and we've heard this a lot as well. It's pretty common. It's not legally; it's no different than any corporation. However, an S corp does not suffer from the double taxation issue. S corporation is taxed like a partnership or a sole proprietor, and all the profits and losses are passed to the shareholders. Now, S corp, I would offer, is a step up from an LLC. Because S corporation doesn't pay taxes, but the owners are now employees of the corporation, they don't pay the self-employed tax. They pay taxes on what they get as payment from the S corporation. So an S corporation has to establish payroll. By having a payroll, they issue W-2s, and the owner can pay themselves a reasonable salary in a W-2. The term reasonable is somewhat confusing, but generally, most states agree that reasonable is about 30 to 35% of revenue. So think about this. If you have $100,000 of revenue and you pay yourself 30%, you are taking as a salary $30,000 for the year, and you are going to pay taxes on 30,000, not 100,000, because the S corp, you only pay taxes on what you're paid. So you can actually reduce your tax bill by becoming an S corporation. And I'll show that in a minute. Now, in order to be an S corp, all the shareholders have to consent, and you have to file with the IRS as an S corp within the first 75 days of the tax year, which means that you can start out as a sole proprietor, you can convert to an LLC, and you can later convert to an S corp. Now, what's that threshold? There's a lot of discussion about when that should occur. But I find that in most cases, there's always exceptions to everything, but in most cases, if your revenue exceeds $45,000 for the year, you should seriously consider converting to an S corp. And that may vary by state, but in the state of Florida, 45,000 seems to be a good number to consider converting to an S corp. To be an S corp, you have to meet these criteria. It has to be a U.S. domestic company. You have to limit shareholders to individuals, estates, and some trusts, not all. You cannot include a partnership or corporation or a non-resident alien as a shareholder. They all have to be U.S. citizens. You cannot have more than 100 shareholders, and you can only have one type of common stock. And everybody shares the same rights with that common stock. And then you have to be eligible to be a corporation. And when you look at what is that eligibility, we find that there are certain organizations that are not eligible to be corporations, like financial institutions, insurance companies, and they can't be corporations. But you, in order to be an S corp, need to be eligible to be a C corp. Here are some of the advantages. notice that the numbers kind of shift a little bit. There's more advantages and disadvantages to being an S corp. So you really retain the advantage of a regular corporation. You don't pay double taxation, which is big. That's huge, and you don't even have to pay taxes on the assets that have appreciated. Uh, and then when you sell them, you don't pay taxes on the appreciation of those assets. Of course, the disadvantage is that it's going to increase your individual tax rates above the minimum corporate rate because you're paying yourself, and some of those benefits of being a partnership are not deductible. And the S corp should follow the 1/3 rule of thumb, in that 1/3 of revenue or income should be distributed to the shareholders so they can pay their taxes. 1/3 should be earmarked for growth, and then the final 1/3 should be done to pay down debt, fund distribution, or distribute to the owners as the investment. You need to be able to cover taxes. Taxes is one of those things that's inevitable. Then you have B corporation. B corporation is like any other corporation, except it's there for some kind of benefit. That's why the B. They are in business to benefit society in some way. And they have to be very clear on what that benefit is. We don't see too many of those. That's a less number. Can somebody close their mic, please? So B Corp are driven by both their mission and profit. They still have to make a profit, but that profit is really secondary to their mission. Their mission has to be something that is going to benefit society in some way. And that has to be clearly stated. Then you have a cooperative. A cooperative is another corporation. The difference here is that it is owned and operated by those who use its services. So the cooperative is owned by the people that use the service. And all the profits and earnings are distributing among all the members in some way. They have to elect a board of directors and officers to run the cooperative. Um, Everybody has an equal voting rights on the business. Anybody can buy shares. Members can buy shares, and it doesn't matter how many shares they buy, there's still one vote. So everybody has equal weight on the voting process for the election of directors, officers, and any decisions that the board decides to execute. Then you have nonprofits. Nonprofits is also a corporation like any other. The difference here is that they are tax exempt. They don't have to pay taxes on their corporate earnings, but they still have to generate a profit in order to stay in business. The difference is that the profit doesn't go to the owners. The profits are reinvested for the reason they exist as a nonprofit. So as a corporation, if you are an entrepreneur who opened a nonprofit corporation, you are going to be paid a salary from that corporation in the form of a W-2. The corporation has to have a payroll. They have to generate income somehow. Now, we normally equate that income to be donations, but a nonprofit can actually sell products or services and make income from that, because they have to generate profits to stay in business. So between revenue from sales or services and donations, they can continue to exist, but all that money has to be distributed or used for the reason they are a nonprofit, for whatever service or product that they provide for the good of society. They just don't pay taxes on it. And here's a quick comparison of the different types. Notice that there is a business separate from its owner on the second column. Sole proprietorship and general partnership, no, they are not together. They're not separate. LLCs, S corp, and any corporation, yes, they are separate. And how the taxation occurs. And what are our tax rates? Well, here's the top 20 in the world and the lowest 20 in the world. The federal tax, the federal corporate tax in the United States right now is 21%. The corporate tax in the state of Florida is 5.5%. Notice that they're high as 37.5% and as low as zero tax. Bahamas has zero. You cannot get away from not paying corporate tax. You're going to have to pay that. And what does that mean? I'll try to illustrate how that tax concept plays a role in S corp LLC versus a C corp. And in this example, I'm showing that they had a income of $500,000. Well, the corporation is going to pay taxes on that. So let's say they pay 35%. Their corporate tax is $175,000. Their after-tax income is now $325,000. They have to pay their minimum shareholder tax rate. Most of us pay that. So the shareholder tax is about $65,000, and the total paid ends up being $240,000. As an LLC, on the same $500,000, they don't pay a corporate tax, so their after-tax income for the corporation is still $500,000. When you apply the minimum shareholder tax rate, and you look at what the total tax paid, is going to be a lot less. So there is a benefit, significant benefit, of being an LLC or an S corp versus a C corp. Now, what I did not include in here were state taxes, because some states have a tax, and then of course, you'd have to deduct from that or add to that total tax paid whatever you have to pay for state tax. Florida doesn't have an individual state tax, so as an S corp or an LLC, it doesn't apply. There are a few other types of corporations. You have professional corporation or professional association. These are specific to some industries. My son has a professional association company, and he's registered as an S corp. He's a realtor, and what he did was instead of becoming an employee of a realty office, he created his own company and he joined the realty as a contractor, so to speak. So he pays his own taxes, he does his own thing. He started off as an LLC. That's when he first registered his professional association. He did it as an LLC. And after, I want to say on his second year, maybe his third year, he converted it to an S corp to take advantage of the tax deduction. We also have series limited liability companies. It's kind of like a company that has subsidiaries. That's what that series is. And then you have low profit limited liabilities. These are very rare, but they exist. Remember that all of these are controlled and managed by the state, not federal. So in conclusion, we saw the different types of ownership structures. You need to pick the proper one for your new business, and you really need to learn the characteristics of each of those and how they impact you, and consider the tax consideration, the liability exposure, your ability to get capital, how much control over the company you want to have, your own managerial ability, what the goals of the company are, what succession plans are in place, and how much is going to cost you to form. And these are the things that you really need to sit down and take the time and analyze to see which form of ownership is best suited for your business. Now, what happens in Florida? And how do you incorporate in Florida? I'm going to use the example of an LLC so I can illustrate the steps required in the state of Florida. First, you have to pick a name. And the state of Florida puts restrictions on naming your company. You have to include limited liability company or LLC in your name. It has to be part of the name. You cannot use words that can be associated with any government agency, like FBI, Treasury, State Department, any other. You can't use those words in your name. And then you have words that are also restricted, like bank, attorney, university. Those are common words that you cannot use in your name. If you want to use them, there's a chance that you may, but you have to submit additional paperwork and get licensed to use those words. Is your name available? That's another thing. You have to know if there's another company that already has that name, you can't use it. You cannot legally use that name. So Florida has a website called Sunbiz Florida, where you can go and you can search a name and find out if there's another company that already has that name. If they do, sorry, can't use it. Come up with a better name, a different name. We also recommend that because you're starting a new business, do a search for a URL and find out if the internet URL, Universal Resource Language, the address, like www.amazon.com, and find out if there's one with your company name on it. If there is, you can't use it. If there isn't, buy it. Even if you don't intend to start off using a website, buy it anyway before somebody else does, and then you're forced to pay them a higher price just to get your URL. So when you are forming your company and you are registering to become an LLC in the state of Florida, in addition to registering your name, find out if there's a URL and buy it as well. The URLs can be cheap, $7-8 in many cases. We've seen cases where a company did not do that. Their company became highly successful. They went to open a website and they found out that the name was already purchased by somebody else, and they ended up paying thousands of dollars to try and get that name. And in some cases, they weren't even successful because the owner did not want to sell it. So it behooves you to do it early. Step 2 is you need to select a registered agent. The state of Florida requires a registered agent. What does a registered agent do? They're the ones that are responsible for receiving all the important documents of the company, tax forms, legal documents, any notice of lawsuits, official government correspondence. That person, that registered agent, is the one that represents you to the government. And it could be anybody. It doesn't have to be a third party. You can be the company's registered agent, but you have to designate and choose a registered agent in the state of Florida, and that has to be part of your documentation that you submit to the state. Then you want to file your articles of organization. These are one of the 2 documents that we said all corporations have to submit. The article of organization, of course, is a legal document. The state has templates that you can use to create this. It's very simple, actually. It sounds more complicated than it really is. What you are going to do is you're going to identify and create the rights, powers, duties, liabilities, and all the obligations of each member of your limited liability company. Now, I am a member of a limited liability company. My son and I both established Puerto Rico Holding Group, and what we do is we buy property and we rent them and manage those properties. And we did that as an LLC. And I'm a member. He's a managing member and I'm a regular member. He does all the work for that organization, and I'm just a participant. And I normally all I do mostly is advise. I don't do participate in the day-to-day activities of the company. I don't even draw a salary from it at the moment. But so he has two organizations that he manages: his S corp as an individual company, and the LLC. The next step in incorporating in Florida is to create that operating agreement. This is the second document I mentioned earlier of the two documents that every corporation has to submit. The state of Florida doesn't require one. However, it's really good practice to create one. And again, there are templates online that can be used to create this document. It's fairly simple. In this document, you are going to look at these 6 topics. How are you organized? How it's being managed? Where's the money coming from? Capital contributions. How the money is going to be distributed, or the profits, how they're going to be distributed within the owners. How is it going to change? What is the process for removing a member, or if a member decides to leave, what happens to the LLC? Remember that if that's not stated, the LLC will cease to exist when one of the member leaves. So you want to make sure that you include in your operating agreement what's going to happen if a member leaves. And then how will the company dissolve or cease to exist if that is the choice of the owners? If all the members decide, let's end this LLC, how is that going to happen, which is the dissolution? You include these 6 things in your operating agreement. And the templates make it very easy to do. After you've done that, the next step is to get an employer identification number. This is free now. All you have to do is register the company for the feds, and you're going to get either an EIN, employer identification number, or a federal employee identification number, or a federal tax identification number. And this is basically a social security for the corporation. That's basically what it is. It's a social security number that the corporations are going to use. You will use that to open any bank accounts. You don't do that. Your corporation now, it's an LLC, so you don't register your bank account under your name. You register the bank account under the company's name with the company's EIN. And then you put as a managing member your name and the managing member's address. So all the correspondence for the bank comes in the name of the company to the address you put as the person who is going to be the agent. And when you hire employees and you do any kind of taxes, state or federal, you're going to use the EIN number. There's a little benefit to that EIN number too. If you are a corporation and you have an EIN number, you can actually go buy materials, products, consumables for your business at a discount, because a lot of companies provide business discounts. If you go, for example, to Costco and you register your account at Costco under the company name with the company EIN, you get a discount that most of us individuals getting a Costco account do not get. And they get some perks and benefits. And you get that EIN number from the IRS. It's free. You just go online or by mail and you register your company and you get an EIN. You need to have an EIN to be a corporation, regardless of what type of corporation you are. And if you notice, when you do your individual taxes and you get your W-2 form, when you fill your taxes, that's one of the questions they ask, is that EIN number, because it's all based on that company's specific number. The next step is, depending on your industry, you need to research and identify, do you need any permits, licenses, or any insurance that goes with your business? You figure, when you look around, you see air conditioning repair, trucks, you see that says insured and bonded. Well, insured, that industry requires all members of that industry to have insurance. So that is a particular requirement that you need to research. Sometimes the state has specific requirements. Sometimes the city or the municipality or the county has specific requirements. So you need to identify what is it that I need in order for me to run my business. There are companies like Inkfile that can actually do the research for you and tell you, okay, you are going to operate this business in the state of Florida, in the city of Davie. You need to have this permit or this license, and then you can go about getting it. And many of those, in fact, most of those have a fee. You have to pay to get those permits or licenses or insurance. And then you open your business. It's really that simple. It sounds complicated, but it goes by very quickly, and it's fairly simple to do. Uh, Now you have your business, and you want customers. How do you get them? Marketing. That's the answer. You have to now market your business. And I get a lot of questions from the students. Well, how do I do that? Well, if any marketing professors here, we talk about uh, the 4 P's of marketing. We talk about um, having a plan. In fact, if you actually do a formal business plan, one of the sections of the business plan is your marketing plan. How are you going to get the word out that you exist? What is it that you provide, if it's a good or service? And in many cases, you want to include comments from the customers on how well you did or are doing. So you need to get that out. That's how you get your business known, is having a marketing process. It's not a one-time thing. It's continual. Once you start, you can't stop. It's like a drug, You get out there, you start marketing, and you continually market and get your business known. Questions? Okay, so how did this all get started? We talk about having an idea to start a business, and I want to offer, it's not just an idea. You have to have an idea that exists within an opportunity. And an opportunity is defined as a favorable set of circumstances that creates a need for a new product or service or a type of business. So let's talk about opportunity for a minute so we can see where the difference lies. There are 4 essential qualities of an opportunity instead of just an idea. It has to be attractive, not just to you, but to your potential customers. It has to be timely. It has to be durable. It's not just okay, I like it now, I'll buy one, but I'll never buy it again. No, that's not good. It has to be something that's durable. And it has to be anchored in some kind of product or service that adds value to who gets it. So I've seen a lot of students come up with ideas, but they're not addressing an opportunity. So my first question to them is, okay, who's going to use this, and how often will they use it? And then they're lost for words because they didn't think about, okay, great idea, but there's no opportunity for it. So you really need to take your idea and find an opportunity for it, or your idea is just that, an idea. And there are ways to identify opportunities. And these are the 3 major ways that we can identify an opportunity: observing trends, solving problems, which is, in my mind, the best one, and finding gaps in the market. And let's look at them individually quickly here. Observing trends. If you watch what's happening in the economy, socially, in the advancements in technology, and the changes in politics and regulations, you can probably identify an opportunity for a business. If your idea matches with that, you're in. Economic trends. Hey, when the economy is in bad shape, people tend to find ways, right? So when the economy is weak, you find many opportunities to start a business where you can help consumers save money. And I give you an example of gasbuddy.com. They started by helping people save money on gas. And initially, gasbuddy.com, all they did was create an app that you install on your phone and track when you needed gasoline, you went and you looked and you found the place where the price of gas was cheapest. And you drove there instead of going to the nearest gas station. And now today, they've grown. They're huge now. Social trends, well, what's happening with the demographics? What's happening with people? You know, people are getting older. There might be an opportunity if your product or service is geared towards the aging population. We are seeing huge diversity in the workplace. We're seeing more people participating in social networks. We see, I mean, the market is almost saturated with mobile devices. We see a focus on health and well-being. I mean, how did all these energy drinks become so successful? They all started as some entrepreneurs seeing, well, people want something healthy to drink and stay awake at work. There's the opportunity. Then you have technological advances, of course. It's not just the computer and the internet. You also have biotechnology and digital photography and all kinds of technological advances in a lot of areas that can create a business opportunity. An example is H2O, audio. What did they do? When the iPhone came out, you couldn't get them wet. What did they do? They saw an opportunity and they created a waterproof case and headphones for the Apple's iPhone. Clearly, they've grown ever since, but there's an example of how an advancement in technology created an opportunity for a new business. When you look at politics and regulatory guidance, you know, right now, it's all about going green. And I'm sure there's a ton of opportunities in that field. Then you have when regulations change and corporations have to abide by that change, there's an opportunity for a company to come in and help that organization comply with that law. There's an opportunity. So if your idea was to create a better filtering system for air, that was your idea, you go, oh, I could create a better filter for air conditionings in everybody's house so that they can breathe cleaner air while they're at home. Well, take that idea, look at the changes in regulations. Oh, they just passed a federal law that organizations that are putting gases out, they have to clean that. There's an opportunity to meld your idea with the opportunity. So looking at trends is a really good way to identify opportunities to match it up with your idea to start a new business. The other form was solving problems. And I think this is the best way to identify an opportunity if you have an idea. When you are doing something and you have difficulty doing it because you're missing something, that's an opportunity. You have a problem that needs to be solved, and if you can solve it, there's your opportunity to match to your idea to start a new business. And I'll give you some examples. Uber, hey, taxis are expensive in the city. And Uber decided, well, wait a minute, we can come in and fill that gap. First, there weren't enough taxis in most major cities, and the ones that were very expensive. What did Uber do? They said, hey, okay, let's open up a ride-sharing service. And they addressed some of the issues very quickly. You don't pay the Uber driver in cash. Why? Because that was a risk. And they mitigated that risk by creating an app. You link your credit card to the app, and you pay via the app. There's no money exchanged in the trip. Spanx. Sarah Blakely was going to a party and was trying to wear a white outfit, and her undies was, you can see them, and she had a problem. She needed to solve it. And what did she do? She took a pair of pantyhose, cut them up, and Spanx was born. And that's now a big, huge business, $1.2 billion valuation. Honey is a browser extension. You can install it on your browser, and wherever you go to buy something online, Honey goes out and finds coupons for you that you can apply to your purchase. I use Honey. I use it on my Amazon. And when Honey will tell me if there's another Amazon vendor that sells it cheaper. And now they're worth $4 billion. And that was a startup not too long ago. WeWork is another example of a small business that grew. They just rent a space. They provide all the equipment, the furniture, Wi-Fi. They even have coffee stations that you can use, and it's beautiful setup. It's a private office. You don't want to work from home. You want to be able to go out. You can go to WeWork, get a space, have a place to do your business, and WeWork is worth $2.3 billion. So there's examples of an entrepreneur identifying a problem and finding a solution to that problem and converting that solution idea into a business. The other way is finding gaps. This is a little harder. It requires more research. But as an example, this lady, Tish, she realized that guitars were made for men, and there were not guitars made for women. And she figured, I want to fill that void. I want to make guitars that are for females. And she created Daisy Rock Guitars. And she makes guitars. There's some examples on that picture. She makes guitars for females. And she's doing well. So in this case, finding gaps in the marketplace is a little tricky. And then when you do find a gap in the market, you need to identify if it's potentially profitable or not. You don't want to try to address a gap that is not going to be profitable for you. It's a little bit harder, I think. Questions? All right, let's move on. So students often ask me, well, is it better just to buy a franchise or to open a new business? And the answer is neither. You need to understand what a franchise is and what it is not in order to make that decision. The same holds true for the question, should I buy a new business? Should I buy an existing business, or should I start a new business from scratch? And the answer is the same, neither. You really need to look at your situation and identify what works best for you, for your idea, for the opportunity that you're trying to take advantage of, and for the type of business that you are creating. I will offer that if you're looking to buy a business versus starting a business, you need to consider the circumstances under which that business already exists. Does it meet your requirements of a business? They already have an established presence. They already have an established process. They already have a structure, a management structure. They already know how they're doing business. They know what risks they're taking and which ones they're not taking. Does that match up with yours? If it doesn't, you're better off starting off a new company. If it does, then maybe it's a better idea to purchase it. In any case, if you're going to purchase an existing business, you want to get it at the greatest discount possible. And there are organizations that exist to help you find existing businesses for sale and will help you navigate the process of buying that company. Just make sure that you're not overpaying for a company because oftentimes they base their valuation on projected income that may never come to bear. So if you're going to buy a business, be very careful and do your homework very, very well before you actually purchase that business. The other option is a franchise. And let's talk about franchises real quick. What is franchising? This is where you, as an entrepreneur, decide to join forces with somebody that already has a company on the same thing that you are doing, and you agree to join them and extend their business as yours. So you are going to look at a firm or a company that already has a successful product or service. We call those the franchisor. And they already have their licenses, their trademarks, and their method of doing business, and they've been successful so far. And you are going to use them in exchange for paying them a franchise fee and royalty. Now, there's some rules and regulations that fall under that, and franchises are managed or handled or governed by federal law. And some examples, McDonald's is a franchise, and Uptown Cheapskate's another franchise, and there's thousands of them. There are basically two types. One is the product and trademark franchise. Think of the example I can think of best was an auto ship dealer. An auto ship dealer is an entrepreneur who decided to join forces with a automobile manufacturer and serve as their selling representative, and they opened a dealership. And so they will follow, or the manufacturer will provide or grant the franchisee the right to buy its product and use its trade name in all its business. And there's very strict regulations on how that's done. The other format is a business format franchise, and that's what we more commonly see as franchise. And this is where there's an arrangement between the franchisor that provides you all the things that you need to become a franchisee or a franchise owner. And all the fast food, convenience stores, motels, is all examples that we already know of franchises. Here's the top 10 new and emerging franchises this year so far. And as I was doing the research for this, I started looking and said, why don't I show them what the top new ones are and how much the initial investment may be? And you notice that number 2, the Koala Installation, is a company whose existence is to provide installation services for businesses and homes. And the initial investment can range between $127,000 to $165,000. That's not cheap. I don't think many of us have that kind of disposable income. In some cases, not only do they require that initial investment, they also require you to have X net worth. So when you add all your assets and liabilities personally, you need to have a positive net worth of $1 million or whatever they require. But when you look at like number 4, Card My Yard, all they do is special occasion yard signs, and the initial investment is $8,000 to $17,000. Wow, that's much more affordable. Now, I had the privilege of the benefit of being able to use Card My Card recently. And what they do is they make signs that gets posted, get put up on somebody's yard. They put it the night before, and you're kind of renting it for the whole next day. And then the third day, they come up and pick it up and take it away. And I have an image here. This is what that sign looks like. I had a friend, this is me right there. It was his 60th birthday, and we gave him as a birthday gift. We purchased a sign, and they went out there, put it the night before. So when he woke up, he saw it, and it was there throughout his entire day. And then on the third day, they went and picked it up and took it away. And these are very customizable to whatever you want. Uh, and it doesn't take a lot of investment. So somebody had the idea of doing this, created a company, was highly successful, and decided to franchise that company. And now anybody else can purchase that franchise. Of course, CBD is very popular. That had to be in here because everybody's after CBD now. But these are the top 10 this year. Now, when we look at the agreements between the franchisor and the franchisee, there are different types. You have an individual franchise agreement, which is between just you and them. It's one franchise. So that means you go to somebody like Subway, you purchase their franchise, and you have one Subway store, and you are the owner operator of that franchise store. Another type is an area franchise agreement, where you can go to the franchisor, Subway, for example, and say, I want to open multiple Subways in South Florida. And the agreement that you enter in is an area agreement, and then you can own multiple franchises of that company, and you become the owner operator of all of them. Now, granted, if you notice here, in all cases, you're going to need employees, which means that you are going to be a corporation and you have to have payroll. The other is a master franchise agreement, where you approach the franchisor, sign a master franchise agreement. You can open your own franchise stores where you are the owner operator, and you can sub-franchise to others under you, kind of like a multi-level marketing kind of thing. And that's a master franchise agreement. When you're looking at buying it, from your point of view as the buyer of the franchise, you really need to look at all the decisions you need to make involving that purchase. There's a lot of money involved in buying a franchise. So you want to be well informed. The law does help us here a little bit. It's really a good option for somebody who wants to start a business, knows what needs to be done, is willing to sacrifice the time and effort to do it, but doesn't have a lot of prior experience. And the reason it's good for somebody like this is because the franchisor will provide training, guidance, products, process, all the things that need to be done in order for them to be successful. But you really need to consider, is franchising good for you? And here are some of the questions that you might want to consider as you go about looking at buying a franchise. Are you willing to take orders? Your franchisor is going to tell you how you run your business. It's going to tell you how you operate. It's just that simple. So if you were looking to become an entrepreneur and start your own business because you wanted to do it on your own, well, franchising might not be the best option for you because you're still going to have a boss. Are you willing to be part of that system instead of being an independent business person? You're now representing your franchisor. So are you willing to do that? What happens if you have an idea for the franchise and the franchisor disagrees? You can't do it. Are you willing to work with that and accept that? and what are you looking for in a business, and how hard are you willing to work? In all cases, anytime anybody starts a new business, you're going to have to work, and you're going to have to work long hours. And in some cases, 7 days a week until the business becomes successful. And you are able to hire people to do some of the things that you've been doing to free yourself some time for other things, for other more important business things, or time off. In order for you to take a weekend off, who's running the business when you're out? So you need to really look at that. And then, are you willing to put your money at risk? A franchise is not a guarantee of success. Sorry. We see way too many people buy a franchise and close within a year. And most importantly, are you willing to share your profits? You have to pay royalties on your gross income, not net income, gross income, which means if you have a year in that your net income was very low, I mean, you were able to keep the business alive because your gross income provided for maintaining the business operating, but you still have to pay royalties on that gross income, which means that your net income might be zero that year. Are you willing to accept that? And as Sandra Torres says, that percentage is something to look out for when you sign that contract. Generally, it's around 5%. In some cases, it can be as high as 40%. So you want to be careful and be very clear on that contract that you're signing with that franchisor. Here's a list of some advantages and disadvantages. I mean, a lot of it is common sense. If you are not meeting the franchisor's guidelines, they can actually cancel your contract, and then you don't have a franchise. And in some cases, we see that. We see, and you see it, you drive around and you see the brand name of a franchise, and a couple of weeks later, you drive by and that name is gone, but the business still exists. Well, they probably gave up or lost their franchise and they're forced to operate on their own. You also have some fees that go with it. Not only the initial fee and not only your royalty fee, which can average between 5 and 40%, but you also have advertising fees that they charge. If they decide to do a regional or a national marketing campaign, the franchisor is not going to pay for it. They are going to tax every franchisee a certain amount to pay for that advertising. So you're going to have an advertising fees. They might also charge you for training new employees. They might train your first team for free, but if you hire new employees and you ask them to train them, they might charge you for that. If you have computer issues or you need their help with some kind of management question or problem, they might charge you for that. So you're going to have to pay somehow. So, and that money is going to come from somewhere. And almost always you are going to take it out of revenue because and I tell this to all my students, you should never take money out of your pocket to pay business expenses. All business expenses should come from revenue. If you're paying out of pocket, you're doing something absolutely wrong. You should never pay for company expenses out of pocket. So what are the steps in buying a franchise? Well, of course, you want to think this out really carefully. Remember that it's going to be costly and it's going to be labor intensive. So you want to make sure it's a deliberate decision that you're making. And it's a 7-step process. Here it is. You want to visit the franchisor's office. You want to meet with a franchise attorney. You definitely want to hire a franchise attorney. You want to meet with them and check their references. You want to make sure that all their documentation is correct and up to date. Then you sign the franchise agreement. You go through their training process, and then you open your franchise. There are some misconceptions about it, and here are some of them, and let's clarify. Franchising is not necessarily a safe environment. It could actually be a failing environment and a very costly one at that. Just because the parent company enjoys success doesn't mean that you are going to be successful. You have your own issues to deal with as a franchisee. So don't think that because the company is successful or maybe other franchisees are successful that you are going to be too. No, that's not necessarily true. It is not necessarily a proven business system. And you do need to hire a franchise attorney or at a minimum an accountant that is familiar with franchising. Um, don't think that you can operate your franchise at a lesser cost. They're not gonna go for that. You have to follow their guidelines. You have to follow what the franchise says. If you think you can do better, you're probably better off opening your own business. And this thing about a franchisor being a nice person, yes, they are really nice when you start. Uh, they might not be so nice after. They might expect you to be who you said you were, an able and capable franchisee that is going to run the business exactly the way they want it. They might not be so helpful later on. Now, the federal rules and regulations that govern franchising help us in a way because the Federal Trade Commission has Rule 436 that requires uh, the franchisees that the franchisor provide the franchisee written disclosures about it. It's called the franchisor disclosure document, and they're supposed to, by law, tell you everything about their company so that you have a well-informed position to make a decision. And that helps. And there's a bunch of categories that are in that document that you really, really, really need to look at. So Marisol asked, how do you start if you don't have revenues? Well, you don't. In order to purchase the franchise, you already have to have the money to start the business. So you are going to buy a franchise. So you need to have access to that money already before you go in. And a general rule of thumb is you need to have 10 to 20% more than what is initially estimated to be the cost of the franchising. Why? Because you are going to enter into some expenditures that were not identified in the process of purchasing that franchise, and you need to be ready for that. If you don't have the extra 10 or 20%, you should have the means to get that easily if you need to. So when you pay the franchisor for the franchise, you are paying the first year's royalties in that process. So that's already included. And they tend to be very ethical. They're generally good people, but the situation of a franchise, it kind of makes it where it's easy to abuse ethical standards. If you are one of those people that wants to get rich quickly, you're likely to do things that you should not be doing in order to get that extra money. Hiding things from the franchisor, like hiding your revenue, saying that you made 100,000 when you actually made 150,000. That's unethical, and it can get you in a lot of trouble. And then you have the potential problem of the conflict of interest of what you want to do and what the franchisor is doing, or what the franchisor wants you to do. Oftentimes we see fast food restaurants that are franchised and they want to add an item. They figure, okay, wait a minute, in my demographics, I can see that if I add this menu item, it's going to be highly successful because everybody here wants it. Well, you can't add that item on your menu unless you get approval from your franchisor. And if they don't agree, you can't do it. You have to get them to agree. So you might have a conflict of interest there. So there are a lot of potential issues with franchises, but it is also a good way to start if you don't have any business experience. Then you also have the option of looking at franchising internationally. There's other overseas companies that sell franchises that you could bring here to the United States. And of course, you need to be careful with that. You have to do your research. Globalization is alive and well. It's still moving at a rapid pace. So you can bring something from overseas, but be very cautious. Consider their standing in their country. Consider what product it is that you're or service that you're trying to bring here. Consider what's here already related to that, if it already exists. I mean, if you start thinking about bringing a fast food restaurant from Europe to here, fast food restaurants are a dime a dozen, so you're gonna have a lot of competition. So, is it really worth it? Uh, and you want to get a good lawyer that understands international law, so that you make sure that you are complying with any requirements of international law, especially if you are looking at potentially sharing knowledge, maybe products with your parent company that's overseas. You have export laws that might apply. You need to be very careful. But that is they do exist, and that is an opportunity. You can also use franchising yourself as an expansion strategy. If you started a business as an entrepreneur and your business is highly successful, well, instead of growing your market or trying to make your company bigger, you can decide to franchise and you become the franchisor. Wow, that's an interesting concept. And when is that appropriate? Well, obviously, when you are in a really strong position, maybe you own a trademark or your copyright of something, and you have a well-designed business that is highly successful. And consider if it's possible, if it'll work to franchise. In that case, you want to look at things like, I'll give you the example. Franchising works for Burger King, but it won't work for Walmart. The capital requirements for something like Walmart is way too much for the average person. They'd have to pay, millions and millions of dollars to buy a franchise. You probably won't have any customers. So you need to look at the sizing, the policies, the process. Can that be duplicated easily someplace else by somebody else? And here are the 9 steps to do that. Of course, you want to develop a franchise plan. You want to get professional advice. You want to get a lawyer. You want to get an accountant. You want to do intellectual property audit. Make sure you're not violating any laws. You want to develop all your franchise documents, which includes everything, including the disclosure document. You want to prepare operating manuals, standard operating procedures, how things ought to be done, what are the requirements of that, or that you are going to require your franchisee to follow. You need to have an advertising strategy and a training program to train these new people. Uh, then you put together a team whose sole job is to get the franchisee up and running. And how are you going to find these people? Where are you going to advertise? How are you going to solicit the prospective franchisee coming to you to ask to buy your franchise? And then you have to help them out and get them all set up. So that is an option for a highly successful small business that wants to grow. And if you're looking, here's some of the things that you want to look at that prospective financee. They need to have good work ethic. The same thing that the franchisor is looking on you, you need to look at the potential franchisee. Ways that you can develop their potential, of course, you want to mentor them, you want to keep your manuals and documentations up to date, you want to keep everything, systems, process, equipment, everything up to date. You want to get inputs from them on what's working and what's not working, and update and make changes as needed. You need to be actively involved in supporting your franchisees. And of course, there's a lot of advantages to that. You don't need to come up with money. The franchisee is going to pay for it all, so that helps. And here's some advantages and disadvantages of doing that. Now, understand that you can actually have a highly successful business and open another facility. If you have, say, a store and you're successful and you choose not to franchise, you can go out and open another one. It's a company-owned facility rather than franchising somebody else. Because when you franchise, you're sharing profits. They want money. They're in the business of making money too. So if you do it company owned, it's all yours. If you franchise, you got to share it. So that's a big disadvantage because you're sharing the profit. On the other hand, if you don't open another one, you're getting income that you wouldn't otherwise have. So I mean, it's something to think about. And of course, you're going to have some additional legal expenses because you have to pay for lawyers and accountants to help you with the franchising process. All right. That brings us to the last topic. This was my add-on at the end after I got everything done because I thought a lot of students asked me about this, so why not throw it in here and maybe provide some useful information for you guys. Social media. When we look at what happens online every minute, here's what we're looking at. 500 YouTube hours. 500 hours of video are being uploaded to YouTube every minute. It's huge. 350,000 Twitter tweets. Look at Facebook. 3 million, over 3 million likes. There's a lot of people on there. Lots of people on there. So we talked about you forming your LLC in the state of Florida. The next step is to market. Woo, what an opportunity here. Use social media. Why not? There is a huge opportunity to get your name known and your product or service known using social media. But you need to use it carefully and properly. There is a big trend of taking customer service into social media. And we see that when a person has a positive customer service experience through social media, 71% of them recommend your brand. That's an outrageous number. The majority of the people that have a good customer service experience with you online is going to recommend your brand. That's nothing but growth. And most companies, 80%, are planning or working towards using social media for customer service. It saves you a lot of trouble of people coming to your office or sending you emails or letter mails and snail mails. And then the customers who engage with you online are 20 to 40% more money that they spend with you. They buy more from you. So why not? Why not use social media for customer service? What is that going to require from me as a business owner to do that? I might have to hire an employee to manage my social media. And there are tons of tools for that employee to be able to do that effectively. My daughter worked for a company in New York City. She lives in New York City. and she was their social media manager. And she had an application on her laptop where she prepared the post for the different platforms that they were going to post in. And she did that for the month. And they will automatically send that post to that platform at the date and time that she designated. She also had another application that if somebody responded to any of her posts, she automatically got notified and they got filtered. If the notification was about the product, if it was about the brand, if it was about customer service, they all came in different categories. So she just picked and chose on which ones she addressed first. Helped her with prioritizing her efforts to manage that social media. So why not? It's a good venue. But if you have poor customer service experience online, it is really bad for you. 56% say they'll never use you again. 52% will tell everybody they know about it. And 54% will ask to speak to a manager because they had a bad experience with whoever was responding to their comments on social media. So you need to really take steps to make sure that whatever you're doing in social media is clear, deliberate, carefully planned, and done in a positive way. So the question is, how do you market? Well, if you look at what's on the internet, 7.83 billion users. That's incredible. Incredible. You look at mobile phone users, 5.22 billion. In every case, the majority of the population are using social media. And in the US, it'll probably tend to be higher. What does it cost? Well, it's been increasing. Last year, you paid about 54 cents for a search ad. Now it's costing about 70 cents. So when you put an ad out there and somebody clicks on it, you pay. And the cost of that right now is 70 cents. Now, when you go back and you look at the numbers of people using this, that 70 cents can grow very quickly, and you're going to pay for that. So you have to have a way of measuring that your social media efforts are in fact bringing you revenue. Who's doing this? The majority of them, 85% of people are between the ages of 18 and 54. That's the market. What do they expect? Well, they want you to respond quickly. 60% want you to respond within the hour. And 88% are going to choose not to do business with you if you don't answer. So you need to be very responsive. And you need to pick the right platforms. These are the most common ones. You have Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. And each one has its unique thing, no? When you look at Instagram, it's all about images. So if you want to market your product, Instagram is a good platform to do it. It will be a better platform than LinkedIn or TikTok, because Instagram is all about pictures. So you want to pick the right one, and you do not have to go to all of them. Facebook is good. There's a lot of people on Facebook. It's a good place to establish a relationship with your customers. Maybe not so much to sell the product, but to market that you exist. It's a good place. One that's not here that I think is a very good tool is WhatsApp. Everybody is on WhatsApp. Well, most everybody. I'm not, but most everybody is on WhatsApp. That's a good place to market. your business. Here's some tips and tricks. Pinterest is good if your target audience are females, because there's a lot of females on Pinterest. Twitter has the largest penetration in the US, so if you want to market nationally, Twitter's a good way to go. Facebook is mostly used on mobile, cell phones. So if you are going to market on cell phones, make sure that whatever imagery you use is appropriate for a cell phone. You don't want to put a big picture that's hard to see. You want to put things that can easily be said or read, viewed or read on cell phones. Again, Instagram is all about visuals. LinkedIn is all about business to business. So you need to be careful, pick the right platform, and make sure that you're not wasting money and time and effort on a platform that doesn't match your business. You want to make sure that you are using the right platform. And then you need to make sure that it's working. You need to understand if you are getting anything in return. What is your return on your investment? You have to be able to quantify that. Now, online, as Jeff Bezos said at the beginning of the video, it's really easy to use tools to see who's clicking on what and are those clicks turning into revenue. There are tons of services. Google has Google Analytics, works behind the scenes. Anything that has to do with Google, you can actually go look and see who's clicking, where are they clicking from, are they buying or are they not buying? So there's a lot of tools that you can use. And how engaged are you? Measure what's the level of your engagement. So you want to link your social media account to your website. That's the first step. And you want to track what happens across those platforms. Facebook has this thing called Facebook Pixel. And what it does, it's a piece of code that you add to your website that lets you measure, optimize, and build audiences out of your ad campaigns inside of Facebook. It's a great tool. And you need to identify, okay, how am I going to measure this? Am I going to measure it by the number of shares that people shared a particular post, or wrote a comment, or retweet, or clicked on a link? Or how am I going to measure my success? And then you got to track it. So there's a lot of things that occur in social media. It's not simply just post something out there. And that brings us to the end, and I'll leave you with this thought from Steve Jobs. I think it's very appropriate. Your time is limited. There's only 24 hours in a day. What you choose to do with it, it's really up to you. So don't waste your time living somebody else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma just because that's the way we did it. No. You don't want to live with the results of other people's thinking. So don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. When you have an idea for a business and you're looking to take advantage of an opportunity, you are going to see and hear the naysayers. Just about everybody that you go to and pitch your idea, they're going to have questions why it won't work. Don't let that discourage you. That lady that created Spanx, one of the interviews that she had, she made a comment. She says, I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want to be discouraged by the comments of others. She just went and did it. And some of us like to get reassurance from our close friends and family, and we might bounce the idea off with them, but inevitably, many of them are going to find reasons why it's not a good idea. So listen to your inner voice and your intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. So with that, thank you for being here today, and I hope I shared some useful information. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, everything went silent. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody has any questions they want to address individually. You'll have a nice weekend.